Marcus Freeman took Notre Dame to the national title game last year, and expectations are even higher heading into 2025. So what's next for the Irish? Coming up, Tim Prister and I break down Freeman's growth, the current state of the quarterback competition, and why this season could be the perfect encore.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, and welcome in. This is Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2018. Now I'm a producer at Fox Sports and have been covering the Irish for the past 5 seasons. And I really appreciate you joining me here on Wednesday, August 6th. And thanks for making this your first watch or listen of the day. Quick reminder to subscribe to the channel on YouTube or follow the podcast wherever you may be listening. Plus, I wanted to let you know the Friday mailbag is back this week. So if you have a question you would like me to answer, drop it in the YouTube comments or send it my way on X at Locked On Irish or on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. Today's episode is presented by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money and use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. I am so excited about today's show because I'm going to be joined by a very special guest, Tim Prister of Irish Illustrated, who is entering his 44th season covering the Irish. We actually did this same 2-part format on the show last year, and we had so much fun with it that we decided to run it back before this season with fresh insight and new stories to share. So today is part 1 of our conversation, and we're going to focus on the present, the expectations surrounding Marcus Freeman after last year's national title run, the quarterback battle between Carr and Kenny Minchey, what makes Jeremiyah Love an all-time great, and Eli Raridon such an intriguing player for the Irish this year, and how Chris Ash fits in as the new defensive coordinator. We also dive into Pete Bevacqua's first year as athletic director and what the program needs to do in order to take that next step. Be sure to come back tomorrow for part 2, where we look back on Tim's 4 decades covering the Irish, sharing unforgettable stories, coaching search chaos, and some of the wildest moments that he has seen on the beat. But first, here is part 1 of my conversation with Tim Prister. Thrilled to be joined by Tim Prister, the owner and publisher of Irish Illustrated. Tim is entering his 44th season covering the Irish, making him the longest tenured person on the beat and a true historian of Notre Dame football. Tim, thanks so much for taking the time to come back on the show. A year ago, you and I talked about Marcus Freeman heading into a pivotal 3rd season. He responded by taking Notre Dame to the national title game and followed it up with a very impressive offseason. So now that he's done all of that, what's next for him? Where do you think he can take the program from here?
Well, we just had myself and 4 other media outlets had a gathering with Pete Bevacqua, Notre Dame's athletic director. And, that was one of the questions, like, does Marcus Freeman have everything he needs now? And does the Notre Dame football program have everything they need to be successful? And he's adamant that they're in it to win national titles. They're fully equipped. He mentioned the hiring of Mike Martin as a general manager, and they're building the Shields Family Hall right now, which is just an absolute monstrosity. Is going to be beautiful. And so, yeah, that was the question: does Notre Dame have everything you need? And he said they are built for that. They're pushing for that, and they fully believe that they can contend for playoff berths and national titles. Obviously, they came really close last year. That's the next hump, getting past teams like Ohio State and Alabama, Clemson, when Notre Dame has played these teams when it's really, really mattered in the postseason. They haven't been able to get over that hump, but beating Georgia was a massive step. It wasn't the same Georgia from the previous couple years when they won national titles, but it's still Georgia and still a great program. And then beating Penn State when it looked at halftime, or at least a little bit prior to halftime, like they were dead in the water, and then to pull that victory out. They are in full go motion toward the national title. Marcus Freeman is thriving. He just has such a tremendous way about him and a magic touch when it comes to dealing with fans and former players and media and players and coaches, etc. He's got it going on, and they're pretty well situated. This is definitely the deepest team that I've seen at Notre Dame since the Holtz years. I don't think there's any question about that.
So basically what you're saying, the next step here is they have to beat one of the super teams. And even though Ohio State had 2 losses last year, they were a super team heading into that national championship. And I honestly feel like they went up against super teams in 2018 against Clemson and Alabama in 2020 as well.
Yeah, they did. And yeah, Ohio State was absolutely great that day. They didn't play up to their abilities against Michigan, which is a little bit inexplicable because Michigan was so vulnerable last year. But that's a rivalry, and that's what happens. But they were ready for Notre Dame. We said it many times at Irish Illustrated that the bridge too far for Notre Dame against Ohio State was Will Howard running the football. He really didn't do that a whole lot during the season. And when you added that component to their offense with all the other assets they have, Jeremiah Smith, et cetera, that was just a little bit too much. So I'm not sure how many teams would have beaten Ohio State that day, but Notre Dame was tasked with that on that day and couldn't quite pull it out.
To me, the most impressive aspect of Marcus Freeman's young career as head coach is his ability to hire great people around him. That's so important for any coach to be successful, and it's not easy. I mean, Brian Kelly has been a coach for a really long time, and I think everyone knows some of his miscues when it came to hiring people. And Marcus Freeman hasn't been batting 1,000, but I think he's done a tremendous job since he got hired as the head coach. So from your perspective, how has Marcus Freeman evolved as a program builder and just building a support staff around him heading into year 4?
Well, you're right about the assistant coaches. And the first guy I think of, we'll talk about Chris Ash, but the first guy I think of is Jaywan Sider, who was the running backs coach at Penn State with Allen and Singleton at running back, the most dynamic duo in the country last year. Notre Dame rivals that this year, certainly. Probably they do go a little bit deeper past two, but Sider was a guy that Freeman was familiar with, had been in contact with through the years. And really, when you look at running back coaches in the country, Sider was at the top of the list. And so he snagged him, and Sider's so grateful to be at Notre Dame. He impressed, the media that has Notre Dame affiliations, we kind of look and hear press conferences a little bit differently, I think, sometimes. And when a guy like Jaywan Sider talks about Notre Dame and the honor of being at Notre Dame. And Mike Martin, the general manager, was the exact same way. You kind of look at those guys a little bit differently and recognize that they understand that Notre Dame's different than most places. So that was a great catch. Jim Leonard was definitely on the radar to replace Al Golden. Al Golden, really, largely the reason Al Golden was hired was because Jack Swarbrick recommended him to Marcus Freeman, and Golden was an excellent choice. He's a Notre Dame fit. Struggled in the red zone his first year, but ended up becoming a great defensive coordinator for Notre Dame. We'll see about Chris Ash. He hasn't been in the college game for a while. I think sometimes that's overblown a little bit. I don't think it's recognized often enough that coaches that come from the NFL are coaching and learning at a level different than the college game. That is the next step up in terms of groundbreaking. The college game has its own groundbreaking approaches to offense and defense, but the NFL's at the highest level, and Chris Ash came from there. He hasn't been a coordinator for a while, but Urban Meyer speaks very highly of him. He was a co-coordinator with Luke Fickell back in 2014 when Ohio State won the national title. So, there's always a transition. Al Golden had a transition coming from the NFL, and Chris Ash inherits a great defense, lost a lot of leaders, but still has a ton of talent and the depth that we talked about. So I expect him to do a really, really good job, but there is that transition. And so, do the players gravitate to him and believe in him the way they did eventually by year 3, really by year 2 with Al Golden? We'll see about that. But those are the two hires. I think Marcus Freeman now becomes attractive on many levels. I think there's a lot of assistant coaches out there that probably weren't considering Notre Dame a couple years ago that are thinking, if Marcus Freeman gives me a call, I wouldn't mind that too much. And so, yeah, I've been on the speech circuit, and we'll be attending another one this week. And you try to explain to people what Marcus Freeman is like, and he just reaches people on every level. He's normal. I mean, he's he's abnormal in that he can reach so many constituencies. But he's normal in the sense that, he can adapt to any setting, any group of people, regardless what it is. Even Lou Holtz. Lou Holtz was revered and respected, but he wasn't always loved because he ran a very conservative offense, and he choked players every now and then, or referees, I should say. I don't know if you ever saw that, Tyler. That was back in the day. Mm-hmm. didn't really choke him, but kind of faked it. So he wasn't always really well liked. I know that the Notre Dame constituency really did not like how conservative he was running the football. You couldn't get by coaching like that today. You couldn't coach offense like that today in the college game. But he was a genius. I will always say I learned more football from Lou Holtz than anybody. But Marcus Freeman is beloved by Notre Dame fans, and there are very, very few exceptions.
The two hires that he made this offseason, I'd like to stay on that point because they're very different. I think when Notre Dame hired Ja'Juan Seider, it was considered a home run because, like you said, he was already considered one of, if not the best running back coaches in all of college football. And Chris Ash seemingly came out of nowhere. It's not like he hasn't been around the college game. He's a head coach at Rutgers, national champion at Ohio State, but he's been in the NFL for a few years and wasn't even calling plays in the NFL. So now that some time has passed and one, you've got to spend some time with Chris Ash and learn more about him, what do you think led Marcus Freeman to hiring Chris Ash? Because the two hires seem very different from the outside.
They are. I think the Ohio State connection has a lot to do with it. You know, Marcus Freeman still has his connections to his alma mater, and I think that had a lot to do with it. He was definitely on his radar. I mentioned Jim Leonard, who wanted to stay in the NFL, but Chris Ash was right there with him. And so when things fell through with Jim Leonard, Chris Ash was definitely Marcus Freeman's choice. A little bit thinking outside the box because he hasn't really been in the college game. And when he was with Texas, he was part of a staff that was let go. So I don't know that we in the media really know him very well yet. I think most of his interviews with us have been very close to the vest. He said all the right things when he took the job regarding, look, this isn't my defense. It's Notre Dame's defense. I'm not going to try to reinvent the great things that Al Golden did. I just want to build upon them and, accentuate a little bit. So I'm not sure we really know. I think the other day when we met with him, he was a little bit looser, cracked a couple jokes. But prior to that, he kept it pretty close to the vest. I don't think I should speak just on my behalf. I don't feel like I really know him that well yet. I think he'll run. I think you'll see more zone. I think how much man Notre Dame ran was blown a little bit out of proportion. I think when people say, really accentuate man coverage, you're thinking 95% of the time, and that's an exaggeration. But I do think, when Chris Ash talks about supplementing or accentuating what was already in place, I do think that a little bit more zone coverage in certain situations is in order. And so I think just the general concept of that is the correct way to go with Chris Ash. I think he'll be very aggressive, but Al Golden was very aggressive. Talking to him, funnel the running game inside. I think that's a pretty common precept of coaches. I think you'll see, we've talked about this at Irish Illustrated on our Irish Illustrated Insider podcast, maybe giving the defensive ends a little bit wider alignment to get a little better angle, a little bit more space for them to maneuver against offensive tackles. But other than that, I think it's all going to kind of unfold with us. And then as it unfolds, it'll give us opportunities to, ask questions about specific things that we see on the Notre Dame football field. But speaking for myself, I don't feel like I really know him that well yet. Whereas with Golden, we had weekly meetings with him the last, couple seasons during this, weekly meetings during the season. So we got to know him pretty well. He was not a guy that really wanted to spend a whole lot of time with the media, but because he just wanted to get back to the office and work. But a good guy and a good coach, and a guy that I think we've had a pretty good feel for.
We'll be right back with Tim in a moment to get his evaluation of where things stand with the quarterback battle and why he has been so impressed by CJ Carr. But before we get to that, here's a message from Monarch Money. Do you ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It is a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to just managing your money, you're also building wealth. It is so much easier to stay on top of your finances when your accounts and spending are in one place, and that's exactly what you get with Monarch Money. Not only does it help you plan your long-term goals, but I personally have found it very helpful in managing my day-to-day responsibilities. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. All right, Tim, we made it 12 minutes and still haven't talked about the quarterbacks yet, which kind of feels criminal because the quarterback battle between Kenny Minchey and CJ Carr has obviously been the story of the entire offseason, and it has reached another level now that fall camp is underway. I know that you haven't been able to see a ton from the quarterbacks in fall camp, but just looking big picture here, how do you evaluate the quarterback situation as we sit here today?
Well, to be honest, going into the spring, I don't think any of us in the media really gave Kenny Minchey much of a chance to make it a competition. In the spring, Steve Angeli was still around, of course, but we anticipated that he would take off, and he did. Interestingly enough, of course, he chooses a team that Notre Dame will play this fall, so that could make the storyline that much more interesting. But Kenny Minchey did a great job in the spring. He showed his athleticism. I don't think that we fully understood how athletic he could be. To his credit, when he came in, he was carrying some pounds that weren't necessary, and he cut down on that. I think he's in much better condition than he was when he got there as a freshman. So he's narrowed the gap. Can Notre Dame win with Kenny Minchey as the quarterback? I don't see why not. Partly because he's surrounded by so many. The rest of the team is really, really in place. You still have a ton of components from the defense from last year. You got Mike Denbrock back offensively, a better receiving core. On paper going into the season, a better offensive line, even without Charles Jagasaw, who had the off-the-field injury. I think everybody's very confident in Sullivan Absher filling his spot. So, can Notre Dame win with Kenny Minchey? Yes. I think it's my opinion, and again, not speaking for everybody else, but I think in general, I think Kenny Minchey I think CJ Carr has a higher upside. And, we saw, again, there's way too much read into Thursday's practice with the interceptions. I can get into that a little bit more, Tyler, if you want. But I just think in terms of getting the ball downfield, like we saw a drill the other day where they were just running streaks and deep balls. I'm not sure I've ever, in recent years anyway, seen a drill like that in Notre Dame because their deep ball wasn't really in play that much. Mike Denbrock didn't want to throw it because he wanted to convert on third down, and he didn't want, third and longs, and so they didn't do a whole lot of that. And he wasn't really confident in the receiving core. He's much more confident in the receiving core now. CJ Carr throws a better deep ball than Kenny Minchey. I don't think that that's a criticism or any great revelation. I just think, and again, I think a lot of people do in our business think that his upside is a little bit higher, but Kenny Minchey brings the running component a little bit more. CJ Carr can run. Certainly, they're not going to run nearly as much as they did with Riley Leonard, but you bring a little bit of an element of surprise off the read option with quarterback keepers with CJ Carr, and he's perfectly athletic enough and capable of, converting a 3rd and 5 with the element of surprise with the keeper and picking your spots. I think if he does win the starting job, which again, we anticipate him doing, I think Mike Denbrock will pick and choose his spots as to when to run CJ Carr. And I think that he'll be, I think he'll use some wisdom in making those choices.
So I've also thought it was going to be CJ Carr for pretty much the entire offseason, but I've also been open to the idea that it could be Kenny Minchey because, at least in recent memory, the quarterback who everyone expects to be the next great Notre Dame quarterback based on the recruiting profile is often not the guy, or at least it hasn't been in recent years. Like, think back to Tyler Buckner, who was supposed to be the guy. And then I think we saw pretty early on when he was at Notre Dame that maybe it wasn't going to work out. Phil Jurkovec is another example. Malik Zaire, probably to a lesser degree, but no one was really expecting Deshaun Kaiser to be the quarterback that he was. Malik Zaire was sort of supposed to be the next man, and then it just didn't happen. If we want to go back to the 90s, I don't think Ron Paulus lived up to that hype as well. So what have you seen from CJ Carr that leads you to believe that he is going to be able to reach his ceiling and play on the field with that level of upside that you've talked about?
That's a good question, Tyler. And the guys that you mentioned Malik Zaire, Phil Jurkovec, and Tyler Buckner. None of them were as accurate as CJ Carr is. I mean, that to me, I saw those guys throw. I didn't think, no offense to Malik, I know he's out there in our world. I never thought Malik was going to be accurate enough when he came into Notre Dame. I didn't think that he was accurate enough in high school. No offense, Malik. Phil Jurkovec, I thought that he would be, and as soon as he came here, we quickly realized that he wasn't, and that the Notre Dame spotlight was overwhelming to him. When he had a bad performance in a blue gold game and the media gathered around him, it was, I mean, you felt bad for him because he had a bad blue gold game because, you touch the guy and it's a sack, and he had, I don't know, a dozen, maybe a little bit less than that, but he had a bad performance. And then just the media after the blue gold game overwhelmed him. And that, in addition to being at a practice in Notre Dame Stadium where he couldn't hit an open net with no pass rush, no coverage, nothing, he couldn't hit an open net. And if you remember Buckner coming into Notre Dame, he changed his throwing motion. He worked with his quarterback coach, and his throwing motion was off, and we never saw the accuracy in practice. I wouldn't say that about CJ Carr. We've seen him make throws literally that took our breath away, where you're watching it and you go, because it's just so pinpoint, thrown perfectly, tight spiral, small window, on target. He threw 2 of those in this past blue gold game. He threw one of those in particular that I remember during his freshman year jersey scrimmage before the blue gold game, that from the view of the 9th floor of the stadium press box was just breathtaking. So right there, to me, that's number one, the difference, that his accuracy, I think that he has tremendous accuracy. Have we seen him throw interceptions? Yeah, he threw one in this blue gold game, but I think Logan Saldate ran a route that was too deep. And, he's got to protect the football, but I think that he has the best ability to do that. I think all things being equal, he would protect the football better through the air than Kenny Minchey. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know, but that's my opinion. That's what I'm thinking. So I think there are a lot of differences between CJ Carr and the guys that you mentioned before. And as I always say, I got to see it with my eyes, and I saw it with my eyes with those guys, and I've seen it with my eyes with CJ Carr, just not at Miami when everything is on the line.
So whoever wins the job has the luxury of handing the ball off to the best running back in the country. And you made the claim last year that Jeremiyah Love could end up being the best running back in Notre Dame history. I feel the same way, but obviously it means a little bit more coming from you, given your historical knowledge of the program. So what is it about Love's game that separates him from other all-time greats?
Well, first of all, Tim O'Malley had to introduce that concept to me because, yes, as somebody that's been around in my 44th season now, I'm reluctant to say best ever when I've seen all of that. Even prior to me working, growing up the 73 national title team, I was working for the 88 one. But so I'm reluctant to do that. But just his ability to make something out of nothing. And then, I wouldn't have said that if he hadn't added the physicality component to his game last year, which I never thought that would happen when he was coming out of high school. I think if we go back and look at a film review of him written by me, probably wasn't real praiseworthy because he liked to run outside. He didn't like to run between the tackles. He kicked everything outside. And when I look at high school film like that, you just wonder how well that translates to the college game. Not sure necessarily that he came in with that ability, but I think Dean McCullough impressed upon him how important that was. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the young man deciding that I'm going to be physical. he was under 200 pounds when he first arrived at Notre Dame. He's 214 now. He played, I think, in the 210, 212 range last year. That, to me, he always was a breakaway guy. We knew that. He was that in high school. But could he run between the tackles and get the tough yards? Who's Notre Dame's short yardage running back? It's Jeremiyah Love, in addition to his, being the greatest breakaway back. Jadarian Price is in that vicinity as well. But he's just a complete back. And, Kyron Williams was tremendous. You hesitate to put somebody past him right away. But Jeremiyah Love has the speed. He's got the agility. He's leaping over tall buildings in a single bound. And the 2-yard touchdown run against Penn State in the Orange Bowl was actually more impressive than his 98-yard run against Indiana. I asked him which he thought was more impressive, and he said the 98-yarder because it set the tone for what Notre Dame was about to do during the playoffs, which is a great, mature team kind of thing to say. But that 2-yard touchdown run was ridiculous.
It was, and I'm just grateful that we get one more season out of him because he is no doubt off to the NFL after this year. Another player I want to ask you about is Eli Raridon. I think he's probably one of the most interesting players on the entire team because we've been waiting for so long for him to break out. He was a big-time recruit coming out of high school, and he also plays a position where Notre Dame has historically been great. And he has been generating a lot of buzz this offseason. And Mike Denbrock said he could be the next great Notre Dame tight end. Have you seen enough from him starting in spring practice and then hearing about what he's been doing in the summer leading up to fall camp that you believe that he can go from a player who had just 11 receptions last season to one of the very best at his position?
I don't know that I've seen that necessarily with my eyes, but like the actual performance itself, but I know what he's capable of. And I know that, we always talk about first guy off the bus. Who do you want coming first guy off the bus? Bryant Young was that guy, Bryce Young's dad back in the day. And there's been a lot of them. But, Eli Raridon is one of the most beautiful football players, athletes you're going to see. He's a first guy off the bus guy, and he has all the ability in the world. Now, I know, early in his time at Notre Dame, there was some concern about his burst off the snap of the football. I'm not sure exactly where that is. I would imagine that it's greatly improved. But I agree with everything you're saying, Tyler. I think he can be that guy. I don't know that we've necessarily seen that in practice or in games, but I know what his capabilities are. And, one of Notre Dame's best tight ends ever. I don't know that that's necessary. I'd like to see 45 catches, which would supplement Malachi Fields and Jordan Faison and Will Pauling, who's a volume receiver coming out from Wisconsin. I do think Eli Raridon will have a breakout season. Let's see if he's one of the greatest ever, but he doesn't need to be that. He just needs to be a very good tight end. And I think he's very capable of that in 2025. It's a damn shame it's his last year of eligibility. He played 5 games as a freshman, suffered an injury, was a torn ACL, was still compromised by that injury at the start of the next season and wasn't ready to play. So he's really had a season robbed from him, but this is last go around with Notre Dame, and I'm expecting a really quality season from him.
If you're looking for a comparison for a player who came in highly recruited, hadn't produced a ton, and then just completely broke out onto the scene to be Cole Kmet, because he had 15 receptions as a sophomore, and then his junior year, his last year with Notre Dame, 43 catches, 515 yards, 6 touchdowns after missing the first couple of games. And when Notre Dame went to Athens and played Georgia, you could make the case that he was the best player on the field at different points in that game. Zooming out a little bit, looking at the roster as a whole, which area of the team are you most skeptical about heading into the season?
Actually, tight end, because I'm not sure about the depth there. And Notre Dame's always very deep there. We've seen Ty Washington, the transfer from Arkansas, just a little bit that last Thursday. And, I've said on a couple of our podcasts, he didn't strike me size, stature. I expected him to jump out a little bit more. I know there was one play where he didn't widen his route enough, and CJ Carr kind of somewhat angrily or insistently directed him, how he should handle it. I just haven't seen it from him. And he left Arkansas under not great circumstances, although I think Arkansas is to blame as much for that as it is Ty Washington. And then after that, Kevin Bauman, who looked really, really good last Thursday, better than he has looked. He's had 3 major injuries. Can he be a factor? We talk about freshman tight ends coming in, James Flanagan. When we were out there on Thursday, they split it up. When they start to scrimmage, they weren't really scrimmaging, but you break down 7-on-7, 11-on-11. The first and second teamers were on one field and the other guys were on another, and Flanagan was on that other field. So I don't really know yet. Jack Larson, he did some things in the blue gold game. Not sure that he's ready to emerge. Doesn't have necessarily the ideal size. The real bad break was Cooper Flanagan, who they really loved, played a big role as a blocker, mainly his first 2 years, but he tore his Achilles in the Indiana playoff game, and he's not ready. So that would be the one area. That's why you do need, you absolutely do need Eli Raridon to step up and be a veteran presence at that position. They're not as deep as they have been. Otherwise, still some questions about the interior defensive line. They have depth, but they lost Mills and Cross. People can say Cross didn't have a very good year last year. He was still Howard Cross, and he was still on the team. He may not have been as effective because he had some injuries, but we need to see just how good that interior defensive line can be. The spot at safety opposite of Don Schuler, I think Luke Telich will win that job. They've got some depth there. Tay Johnson's flashed physically. I'm not sure if he's ready to go as a full-time player and understands everything that they're doing. Otherwise, though, they're a pretty complete team. I'm nitpicking. When you ask Tyler their depth, I haven't seen this since Holtz. And so when when they aren't 3 deep at one spot, you say, there's a little bit of give there, and that's why I'd say about tight end. But this is a very deep football team, a very experienced football team. The great thing, even though you lost a bunch of leaders, the great thing is that most of these guys experience that 16-game run, and that experience is invaluable.
Yeah, it's probably a good sign when I ask you basically what your biggest concern is. Did you bring up the number 2 tight end? That means things are probably in a pretty good place. And I feel like the bar has clearly been raised after last season's national title game appearance. And one thing that I've talked about a lot is the way that Notre Dame has handled success has not always been great. Specifically at the start of last season, they started to figure it out at the end of the year. They went on that incredible run, but this is a new team. So how do you think this team is embracing the pressure that comes with these extremely high expectations fresh off a national title game appearance?
Well, that's a little hard to say, I guess, but I'll point to what I just said about these guys experience a 16-game season. And so, if you don't, these are Notre Dame football players. These are smart, very talented guys. I'm very confident that they're very confident going into the season. Now, who in the country is opening at Miami and then playing Texas A&M at home? I had actually intended to look through who, if anybody, is anybody close to that? There may be. Of anybody, Tyler?
Not a team super competitive, I would say, but I looked at, don't ask me why, Kent State's non-conference schedule. They have Texas Tech, Florida State, and Oklahoma.
Holy cow. Well, those are paydays.
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody's coming to Kent State to play those games. So, if anybody is prepared mentally and emotionally, it should be this Notre Dame team, because most of these guys have experienced this. Schedule's more difficult. I look at that Arkansas game last weekend of September. I've never been to Arkansas. I've never been to Fayetteville. Notre Dame football has never been to Fayetteville, Arkansas. Playing at noon, everybody says that's better than a night game because everybody gets liquored up and is really ready to go by an 8 o'clock kickoff or whatever. But still, middle of the day at Arkansas, I find that to be challenging. Everybody thinks Boise State's no good because they lost Ashton Genty. That is not true. They still have their quarterback back. They have weaknesses on the back 7 of their defense and special teams. But still, it's Boise State with a coach that understands what it takes to get to the playoffs. It's a hell of a lot easier playing against a Mountain West Conference schedule, but you still have them. You have USC. NC State had a down year. Dave Doran is accustomed to winning 8 or 9 games a year, so you have to deal with that. 3 of the 5 games in November are on the road. Boston College is a rival. I think at Pittsburgh concerns me the most just based upon who has the most talent among teams that Notre Dame goes to play on the road. Miami is there, but Miami doesn't have – they're going to have to develop their chemistry. They brought in a bunch of 4-star transfer talent, but they've got to develop their chemistry. They've got a good offensive line, so that's concerning. At Stanford's not going to be difficult. And Syracuse, if Steve Angeli's a quarterback against Syracuse in the home finale, you just don't like the vibe of that. But Syracuse lost a ton, and their schedule is absolutely brutal. By the time they get to Notre Dame, they are going to be beaten up, and they don't have the depth or the talent that they had last year. So it's challenging. Are the Notre Dame players confident? Marcus Freeman and the experience that they went through last year, they've got to be pretty damn confident.
Okay, last question for part one. Athletic director Pete Bevacqua and Marcus Freeman seem to be in lockstep, which has always been an important partnership, but I think especially now, just given the ever-changing landscape of college athletics. So how would you assess Pete Bevacqua's first full year in charge of Notre Dame athletics?
Well, I think he's a great personality. And I think Jack Swarbrick did a sensational job, an underrated job. Although there are many people that didn't like him, doesn't come across maybe as cordial as Pete Bevacqua, but I think he did a great job. I really enjoyed Pete. I actually, I didn't realize it at the time. He was a walk-on punter back in the late 80s. Now, he was injured. I don't know if he was ever actually on the practice field when I was covering that program, but all of these names for the last 40-some years, I'm familiar with them. I wasn't familiar with his name, but he so much wanted the opportunity to be the athletic director at Notre Dame. It's personal for him. Truly loves the school. I think he's got a great way about him that maybe Swarbrick didn't always have. I didn't interpret it negatively, but everybody views all of these people that are in the public eye, including you and me, Tyler. Based upon what impression they get of you when they hear you and see you. Pete Bevacqua gives off a really good vibe, and it's personal for him. I mentioned that we had a sit down with him the other day, and we went over a bunch of things. We've had those stories on IrishIllustrated.com. I would encourage people to check those out. I think you're going to have to pay for them if you're not a subscriber, but I would still encourage you to do so. But I like Pete. I started to say I got to know him very well during the 23 season when he kind of shadowed Jack Swarbrick through the whole year. And we would talk before games, and he wasn't fully on the job yet. He was kind of interning for the spot, and so he was a little bit more available to engage in conversations with a fellow Notre Dame grad. And so got to know him well. I think he's got a great way about him. I think he's got an excellent feel for Notre Dame and what Notre Dame wants. The interview that we had with him the other day, spending 45 minutes with him on the record and then a little bit of time off the record with him. He understands Notre Dame. It's personal for him. He loves Notre Dame. And I think the rest of the brass at Notre Dame will look at Pete Bevacqua as an excellent representative of the university.
All right, that is going to do it for part one of my interview with Tim Prister. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first watch or listen of the day. If you enjoyed today's show, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a 5-star rating or review wherever you are listening to the podcast. And don't forget, the Friday mailbag is coming up, so get your questions in. Drop them in the YouTube comments. Send them to me on X at Locked On Irish, or shoot them over on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. I'm going to be back here tomorrow with part two of my conversation with Tim, where we'll take a trip down memory lane and hear some of his favorite stories from over 4 decades covering Notre Dame football. You are not going to want to miss it. I will see you then.